Chapter 4.
I brought Gogo to Lausanne and enrolled her in a school called Les Colombes, the Doves. She was to stay there for several years. It was our first true separation, and I suffered deeply from it. To leave her, so small, so delicate, in the care of strangers, at the very moment when a child, like a bud, begins to take on the color of the flower to come. Yes, I knew she would suffer. And I would suffer too. But years later, I would be rewarded by what that moment allowed her to become. And so, I remain convinced, I was right. My own life in Paris, meanwhile, grew dimmer. Long hours of solitude, a melancholy that settled like fog on the streets. If ever I had longed to be a man, it was during that time. To walk out the door at any hour, unafraid, invisible. To wander the city at night, to sit alone in a cafe with no questions asked. These seem like minor privileges. But they are sharp, vivid freedoms, and for me, they were forbidden. Youth and gaiety, I didn't know them then. Strangely, I would come to know them much later. I stood at a crossroads in my life, asking myself what this existence was for, what it meant. And although so much of it was shadow, I felt almost happy. A beggar's happiness, finding a dry place to sleep and watching the rain fall from the other side of the glass. I knew one thing with certainty, Schiap would never marry again. Marriage had struck her like a blow to the head, and no part of her wished to risk it twice. From then on, life became a series of friendships. Some tender, some effortless, some spiritual, some sharp, some fleeting. Always marked by a restless hunger for solitude and for freedom, for small rebellions. Though it was often women who helped her most, she got on far better with men. Still, none ever had full power over her. Demanding, yes. Capable of giving much, yes. But she never met a man she truly needed. She turned further inward, unaware that soon, a fantastic surge of will and energy would need to find expression. And by chance, sheer chance, she chose a path no reasonable person would have ever suggested. Once or twice, I tried designing clothing, instead of painting or sculpting, which I did rather well. Designing garments, I don't see as a profession. It's an art, and, in many ways, the most difficult and disappointing of all the arts. Because the moment a dress is born, it already belongs to the past. It begins as a vision, sharp, burning, exact. But in the act of bringing it into being, details intrude, materials misbehave, seams change shape, fabrics rebel. And even the best result often leaves a faint bitterness. Because once the dress is finished, it's no longer yours. Unlike a painting, it doesn't hang on a wall. Unlike a book, it has no protected life. It cannot live without a body, and once worn, it begins to vanish. Someone else will wear it. Someone else must give it life, or try. They may elevate it into a hymn of beauty, or destroy it, without even realizing what it once was meant to be, a dream, an act of expression. More often, it becomes an object. Worse, a caricature of what it was meant to be. Full of mad ideas, I began meeting people, and eventually connected with the house of Maggie Ralph. A kind gentleman, exceptionally polite, told me quite seriously that I'd be better off growing potatoes than trying to make dresses. I had no talent, no technique. And truth be told, I never had any illusions otherwise. One day, an American friend came to visit. She was always impeccably dressed, but that day she wore the simplest sweater I'd ever seen. And yet, something about it intrigued me. Now, I had never worn sweaters. Never, nor any sportswear. Whenever I dressed to go into the countryside, I always felt as if I looked mortally ill, the sort of person who would frighten birds away. But this sweater, it was handmade. And it looked respectable. Many would later write that I launched my career knitting sweaters at a window in Montmartre. The truth? I'd never even seen Montmartre. And I had absolutely no idea how to knit. The art of holding two tiny needles and conjuring up a garment from thin air? To me, it was pure sorcery. Still is. I never even tried. I just knew, with certainty, that anything I produced would look like a slice of Swiss cheese. But this sweater, it was odd. The shape was wrong. The color even worse. Elastic, yet it didn't sag like most knits. Where did you buy this? I asked. Oh, It's from a woman. That woman turned out to be an Armenian peasant. Married, practical, silent. I visited her. We became friends. We remain friends to this day. Sometimes I still stop by their little factory, where they now make knits for my collection. I asked her, if I make a drawing, would you try to create it? She replied simply, yes. We'll try. So I sketched something like a child might draw. A great butterfly-shaped bow on the front of a scarf wrapped around the neck. I told her, the bow must be white against black. And the reverse side should also be white. They were not moved by this eccentricity. But, bless them, they tried. That, in truth, would become a theme throughout my career. Artisans who embraced my wildest ideas without complaint, and carried them out with quiet brilliance. The first sweater was a disaster, lopsided, dense on one side, and altogether unsightly. Gogo could perhaps have worn it. Perhaps. The second, better. But the third was sensational. Trying to hide my nerves, I put it on with confidence, convinced, almost, that I looked sensational. And off I went, to a dinner party. I caused a sensation. At the time, women were mad for sweaters. For years, Chanel had been releasing machine-knit dresses and blouses. But my sweater, mine was different. Entirely. And every woman wanted one. They swooped in like hawks. The first to place an order was a buyer from New York. She worked for Strauss. She ordered 40 sweaters and 40 skirts. Recalling the tale of Ali Baba from my father's copy of 1001 Nights, I answered boldly, agreed. I had absolutely no idea how those two peasants, the Armenian woman and her husband, would produce all of it in 2 weeks. No idea where the skirts would come from, or what they should even look like. So we discussed it together, and then scoured Paris in search of volunteers. To our surprise, the Armenian community was vast, and in no time, we had assembled an army of knitters. We quickly showed them what to do. When I brought the wool, no one demanded immediate payment. The great bow, my little emblem, was reproduced in many colors, but always returned to black and white. The skirts, though, they were a problem. What fabric? Who would sew them? A young Frenchwoman who lived nearby and occasionally helped with dressmaking offered her insight. We decided, the skirts must be simple. No frills, no tricks, just slightly longer than current fashion, down to the knee. But where to find the fabric? And how to pay for it? I returned once more to Galeries Lafayette, scanned the shelves, and picked something that looked dignified and affordable. And that's how it happened. The order was completed, shipped, and paid, all within 3 weeks. Thank heavens. Success emboldened me. After the scarf with the great bow came more scarves. Wrapped at the neck, slung low around the hips, even reimagined as men's ties in vibrant colors. And then, came my first private client, Anita Luz. At the time, she was soaring, radiant from the success of Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. With her by my side, I found my footing. I was no longer on the edge of fashion. I had entered it. Soon the Ritz was filled with women from all over the world, in black and white sweaters of my own invention. Each one was embroidered in wool across the back. The thread matched the accent color of the design. Not bold, not loud, but subtle, like brush strokes. They shimmered against the solid background in a way that echoed Impressionist painting. At the time, the world was intoxicated with Dada and Futurism. Chairs were mistaken for tables, tables for stools. To ask what a painting meant was scandalous. Poems were puzzles without keys. Even a touch of fantasy? Taboo. Only a few knew of the flea market. Women had no waists. They wore jewelry made of dough, flattened their busts to resemble boys. And Schiap? She needed space, a place to live and work as one. I was lucky. I found an attic apartment at 4 Rue de la Paix. There, I carved out a bedroom, a sitting room, and a studio. There were no fitting rooms, so I bought folding screens. They followed me faithfully from that day forward. The conditions? Less than ideal. Low ceilings, sweltering heat, and rats. What name shall we use for you? They asked. My own, of course. No one will be able to pronounce it. That doesn't matter. And it didn't. No one ever said it quite right, but everyone knew what it meant. I painted a sign and hung it outside. Schiaparelli. For sport. Letters began pouring in from young people across the globe. Some were innocent, some breathless, all filled with hope. What should I do? They asked. Where should I begin? What school should I attend? My answer disappointed them, I'm sure. Where to begin? First, do you have a gift? Yes or no? The only true school is the atelier. Loud, crowded, alive, creative chaos. The best training is to be an apprentice in Paris. Pick up pins, watch, learn. One day, you'll assist. Another, you'll become a master. And if fortune favors you, perhaps you'll rise to lead a great Parisian house. Like Madame Vionnet. Asymmetry, poetic, but it all must remain rooted in the frame. The more respect you show to the body, the more life the garment will carry. Add shoulder pads, add bows, lower the lines, or raise them. Soften a curve, exaggerate a dip, highlight one feature and then another. Just never disturb the harmony. The Greeks, more than anyone, save perhaps the Chinese, understood this law. Their goddesses, even the strong ones, possessed that serene perfection, that impossibly weightless grace. Up in my attic, more and more people were arriving. And my sketches? They were growing bolder by the day. Raise the shoulders, return the bust to its rightful place. Place the pads on the shoulders. Remove that dreadful swelling, give the waist back its dignity. Lengthen the gowns. I began to decorate sweaters with African motifs of my own invention, drawings inspired by the Congo. On one sweater, sailor tattoos, serpents, pierced hearts. On jersey dresses, skeletons, shocking to the bourgeoisie, but fascinating to fashion magazines, which at the time cared very little for fashion. White lines echoed rib cages, and the women who wore them appeared almost transparent, as though lit from within by X-rays. I painted fish across swimsuits, they fluttered and flickered on the belly like the real thing. And inspired by Lindbergh's great crossing of the Atlantic, I followed the skies. I designed flight suits, golf wear, sport ensembles. And finally, my first evening gown. It was a revolution. A long, narrow, floor-length dress in pure black crêpe de chine. Simple, sleek, perfectly severe. Over it, a white crêpe jacket, with long panels that crossed at the back, only to be tied in front, like wings folded inward. That gown, austere and unyielding, was the greatest success of my career. It was reproduced everywhere, across the world. I designed another in the same spirit, only this time, the jacket ends were tied in a knot at the front and finished with rooster feathers. After that came tweed, tweed, tweed. One day, a beautiful young woman came to me. She had striking features and a determined energy. Can you do anything? I asked her. Nothing, she answered plainly. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. I can't afford to hire someone for nothing. And I did feel sorry, she would have looked perfect in my dresses. What a shame, I added. But she returned. Every month, she came back. Her persistence softened me. At last I said, all right. You win. I don't know if she ever regretted it, but from that moment on, she was always at my side. She became our talisman, a symbol of unwavering devotion. The American, Bettina Jones. There was little Loretta, the Italian errand girl, who is now our head seamstress. And a solemn, intense French girl who had started with me from the very beginning. We were inseparable, a strange, loyal family, held together by pins, thread, and a wild kind of purpose. We were happy at 4, Rue de la Paix. But I cannot begin to describe the nights I spent there. Rats, mice, and I, mortally afraid of them, watched as they danced their devilish saraband around my bed all night long. But cats, no, cats filled me with a kind of deep revulsion, something closer to nightmare. So I got myself a small fox terrier, hoping he would be my savior, my exterminator. But alas, he feared the creatures even more than I did. At the faintest rustle of a mouse, he would leap up onto my bed and tremble beside me. At daybreak, the two of us, brave souls that we were, would rise and make our way to the nearest hotel, simply to get some sleep. It was around this time that Amelia Earhart repeated Lindbergh's magnificent feat. Not everyone knows what an extraordinary woman she truly was. She often visited me, and we became close friends. Beyond her courage and rare gift, she had a kind of singular beauty and deep humility. I once traveled to America to visit her. Between her adventures, she lived quietly in a small cottage, and there the three of us, Amelia, her husband, and I, spoke for hours about her next flight. I was already planning to go with her, but business held me back. She went alone, into her fate, and vanished, without a trace. Then something unexpected. An old friend arrived from Italy, almost a sister, Gab de Robilant. She had a bit of money, and we decided to find a place together. At first, we took 2 dreadful rooms on Rue de Ponthieu. But soon we discovered an ideal apartment on Boulevard Saint-Germain. It suited us perfectly. 2 separate wings, one for each of us. We phoned when we wanted to speak, and never entered each other's rooms uninvited. In this way, we preserved our friendship, while never feeling quite alone. Now I had an interior all my own, and I could shape it to my taste. A bedroom, a salon, a tiny dining nook, and a proper sitting room. Jean-Michel Frank made me an enormous orange leather sofa, and 2 low armchairs in green. The walls were white, the curtains and the seats, in a stiff, glossy, white rubberized fabric. Bridge tables, lacquered black with glass tops. Banquettes along the wall, covered in green rubber. It wasn't exactly grand, but it was new, unusual, and it had charm. For my first dinner party, I invited Madame Chanel. At the sight of the modernist furniture, the black plates, the stark decor, she shuddered. As if she had stepped into a mausoleum. Still, the dinner went well. I had hired 2 servants, a Russian man and a French woman. They remained with me for 20 years. That spring night was warm, and the white rubber seat covers began to imprint themselves onto the guests. For quite some time, no one noticed. But at the end of the meal, when everyone stood, they looked like strange cartoons, as though dressed in caricatures of my sweaters. Meanwhile, the attic on Rue de la Paix had become a truly international meeting ground. Glamorous women from around the world, theater stars, film actresses. It was beautiful, and crowded. Oddly enough, despite my love of playfulness, of absurdity, my most loyal clients were women of the utmost elegance and restraint. Diplomats' wives, bankers' wives, millionaires, artists' wives. They all preferred the simplest pieces, discreet daywear, plain black dresses. It didn't matter that everything I made was copied. In fact, that was a sign of success. The moment your designs stop being imitated, you are no longer relevant. Copyright? Law? Nothing could stop it. And in those days, I had no publicist, no advertising. But I had the greatest publicity of all: my dresses. The women who wore them recreated them, and resold them as originals. And so the name spread. No fraud, no bribery, just design. Packing my beloved folding screens with me, I settled once again at 4, Rue de la Paix, this time, on the 2nd floor. I arranged my atelier like a ship. Ropes strung across the ceiling, scarves and belts and knits hung like signal flags. A joyful chaos of color, a soft and radiant disorder. I added a line beneath the sign out front, for the city. For the evening, one version painted in white on the side of a small black truck, another printed in black on crisp white paper. The studio gleamed with lacquered leather curtains, furniture of dark wood, and on one wall, a hand-drawn map of the Basque Coast, painted in brilliant blues and greens against white plaster. A touch of the Atlantic. A touch of childhood. During this period, I sketched a small 3-colored cap, its shape like a chimney flue, able to twist into any form when worn. Ina Claire wore it instantly. And thus, a new fashion was born. An American manufacturer bought one, mass-produced it, called it the Madcap, and made millions. As for me, I made nothing, but I was content, I suppose, watching my little idea spiral around the globe. Then the curse began. The cap appeared in every shop window, every street corner, every bus, every car. Even Price Eunuch was selling them. It followed me everywhere, until one day, I spotted it perched atop the bald head of a baby in a stroller. winking at me like a twisted joke. That was the final straw. I ordered my shopgirls to destroy every last one still in stock. Sell no more. Speak of them never again. Meanwhile, I had begun to stage little presentations. Just 2 mannequins, a few pieces, but it was a kind of theater, and I was beginning to enjoy it. Among the acquaintances of my dear friend Gab were some wonderfully strange people. She herself was cheerful, always busy, always solving some mystery of life, and she helped me end my strange hermit existence. Gab had a kind of bravery, the kind that could wear my most eccentric creations, even when they didn't suit her tastes. And that, in a woman, is the truest sign of friendship. Then, unexpectedly, came the call from Lausanne. 5 o'clock in the morning. They needed my consent for emergency surgery on Gogo. Trusting the doctor, I gave it, and took the very first train. I had often visited Gogo before, watched her progress. She had even learned to ski and to ride. The doctors were thrilled, but this time, it was appendicitis. Sudden, and already purulent. For a full month, my little girl lay between life and death. The doctors gave no guarantees. They made it clear, everything now depended on luck. At the same time, I was building my first real collection. I designed it practically on the train, traveling overnight, staying 48 hours in Lausanne, returning to Paris, working for 2 days, and then back to Lausanne again. So went the month. Each trip, I didn't know what I would find. A smile? Another fever? I didn't dare hope. Then, finally, she began to recover. And I presented my first true collection. It was a major event. A complete success. And I remember almost nothing of it. My mind was far away. There was no room to focus. I've always had a poor memory for names, for faces, for detail. But sometimes, an unimportant thing returns, like a flower rising up through sand. That summer, I spent with Gogo. We were always together, trying to make up for the time we'd lost. She had begun to hate my work. She saw it as the thing that took me from her. I tried to explain, again and again, that we only part for reasons that matter. Her treatment, my responsibilities. Often, I brought her with me, to let her see what my life really was, to understand why absence was not rejection. I remember one lunch at a small restaurant near the Krillin. At the next table sat Princess Mdivani, who later married the Spanish painter Sert. "Oh," she exclaimed, "this child, she's a Renoir." He would have adored painting her. "Who's Renoir?" Gogo asked, as we walked out. "A great painter, my love. One of the greatest." The next day, Pierre Cole, a gallery owner and friend, called me to see his new acquisitions. I brought Gogo along. Among them was a Renoir, a portrait of a modern woman, very red, very robust. It was quite good. I looked at it, thoughtfully. And then Gogo began to cry, full sobs. "Mama, Mama, do I really look like that?" That summer, we went to Lavande, a little village in the south, perfumed with lavender and sunlight. And for a moment, all our problems seemed to disappear. We spent carefree hours in the water, on a boat, with a few dear friends. And when we sat at a restaurant served by fully nude waitresses, none of whom looked remotely like Venus, I finally understood the necessity of clothes. That summer, Gogo had her first heartbreak. She fell in love, madly, with a young man who played the musical saw. The least romantic instrument imaginable. But to her, he was a god. She watched him for hours in reverent awe. To her, he was Pan incarnate. On our way home, we stopped in Toulon. I ordered a bottle of wine with lunch, just to cheer her. All night on the train, she sighed, clutching my hand. "Oh Mama, if only you knew how miserable I am." It was time to return her to Lausanne, for a final operation. Thankfully, it was the most successful of all. Her days at the Swiss boarding school were finally over. I don't remember the names of those who visited me then, or even some of the friends I made. But I always greeted my clients personally in the salon. I refused to let a myth grow, that I was too busy, creating, to meet with women face to face. 2 words were forbidden in my fashion house: creativity, unbearably pretentious, and impossible. I stayed close to the women who trusted me. I tried to help them find their style. And I believe, That is the true secret to dressing well. Each woman's style must reflect her life, her work, her joys, and yes, her means. After all, was it the fates at their looms, or a seamstress working for a difficult client, who first said, "Life hangs by a thread"? One day, a thin, rather plain girl was sitting in the salon. She looked disheveled, unimpressive. But something about her intrigued me. I offered to help her choose her wardrobe. She agreed, letting me do what I liked, occasionally barking out an opinion in a raspy voice. She left transformed, nearly beautiful. Later, I read an interview she gave in America. She said her transformation in my salon was the beginning of her extraordinary career. Her name? Katharine Hepburn. Another time, from behind a screen, a loud, older woman called out in a deep, clipped voice. "You know you're a genius, don't you? What you're doing here, with these silly geese? Come have tea with me." Dressed impeccably, she was every inch a grande dame. Lady Oxford, one of the brightest, sharpest women in all of England. Poiret once wrote a book called Dressing the Era. But really, it should have been titled Dressing Women, because when a woman is stripped of clothing, she loses her individuality. She becomes someone else, more herself, yes, but also more raw, more conscious, sometimes, more cruel. I remember, back when I was barely old enough to read, seeing a series of illustrations. Two people swimming in the sea, a deserted beach, warm sun. They laugh, talk, bond in perfect harmony. Then they vanish behind separate rocks to dress. One returns, pure elegance, a monocle, silver-tipped cane. The other appears in tatters. They gaze at each other, puzzled, exchange a cool farewell, and walk away in opposite directions. There was nothing left to say. Two women visited me often, one very plump, the other rail-thin. Both impeccably mannered, so proper they could have passed as convent gatekeepers. Every season, they arrived with a heavy metal cash box brimming with bills. They bought the most extravagant gowns, especially evening wear, always in cash, one note at a time, never leaving a name or address. We were curious. Who were they? One day, in their presence, a dapper old libertine lounging in the salon leaned over and asked, "My dear, since when do you cater to madams?" They were, in fact, the proprietors of a modern-day maison telier. I didn't bother inviting him to visit their establishment and see how marvelously my dresses suited the ladies of the house. The poor man, who fancied himself so worldly, would have been scandalized. Later, I traveled to London and stocked up on tweed. The papers couldn't stop talking about my culotte skirts, for travel, for city, for cocktails, for sport. Graceful, feminine, and to my mind, more modest than most dresses. After all, in countries where women live in seclusion, they wear trousers, while men opt for skirts. The debates were intense. Though the idea wasn't new, Paul Poiret had done them before me. The outrage was fresh. Men wrote furious letters to editors, demanding fines for women in trousers. "I've never heard of such audacious impertinence," fumed a Daily Mail reader. "A foreigner, telling us what to wear." The Daily Express warned, "If a woman dares to appear at Wimbledon in one of these bifurcated ensembles, she ought to be punished." Lily de Alvarez, the famed tennis player, had worn one of my culottes at a match in Monte Carlo, to wild acclaim. But as she stepped onto the courts of Wimbledon, a fellow player teased, "Where are your scandalous trousers?" With a wry smile, Lily replied, "Oh, they caused such a fuss." I didn't dare, and then everyone noticed, she was wearing them. That was my second trip to England. Years had passed since my ill-fated marriage. London felt different now. I began to understand England, its life, its people. I was always intrigued. Why are the English so honest and reserved, the ones who write the best novels about thieves, swindlers, and grim murderers? I adore the English. Their loyalty, their restraint, their unspoken truths, their gentle madness. I love them deeply, for they are mad, mad, mad. During that visit, I often saw Lady Oxford. At 5 a.m., she'd collect me from the Dorchester Hotel and whisk me away to the Gnome, her country hideaway. We'd talk for hours among flowers and birdsong. Her notes, always penciled by hand, offered sharp advice on what to see and whom to meet. Fierce, witty, brilliant, she assessed people like a surgeon. Rarely wrong in value, almost never right in predicting destiny. Back in Paris, I immersed myself in every social circle imaginable. I went out, met people, visited a nightclub for the first time, then traveled to Monte Carlo and St. Moritz. Though painfully shy, no one ever believes me. So shy I sometimes freeze at the simple act of saying hello. I never once feared stepping out in the boldest outfits I created for myself. Antoine, the most daring and visionary hairdresser of the time, crafted fantastical wigs for me. For evening wear, even for sport. I wore them, white, silver, crimson, against the snowy backdrops of St. Moritz. And I couldn't have cared less about the spectacle they caused. I paired them with my simplest dresses. They were part of the look. In those days, we weren't afraid to stand apart. And really, what's to blame in wigs? In the most elegant eras, no one dared appear in public without one. Can you picture Voltaire, Catherine the Great, or Louis XIV without a wig? Before a gala, you'd simply send your wig to your hairdresser. No wasted time, no pins, no dryers. It returned, gleaming, glorious, and you popped it on. No fussing with your own hair. But what if you were swimming? Golfing? Chasing a bus? I left Paris again, back to America. This time, journalists and photographers awaited me. Bouquets, headlines. My first brush with fame, it touched me, enchanted me, almost went to my head. But as always, success brought a strange detachment, a vulnerable awareness of how fleeting it all was. A quiet sadness, just like when I was a child. When birthdays came with gifts and surprises, I'd crawl under the table and cry, to the horror of puzzled grown-ups. I never thought any of my designs were perfect. A fashion magazine offered me $1,000 to write an article on aviation and pilot attire. It required a trip to Philadelphia. I woke to heavy snow, gray skies, no flying that day. But I'd left the hotel so early, the editors hadn't cancelled in time. I wrote the article on the train, making up nonsense. Iodine before flying, absurd ideas. In Philly, 3 solemn men scolded me. Was this trip really necessary? Oh come now, I replied airily. You call this bad weather? The shoot took place in a hangar. The article was rewritten several times. I was embarrassed and donated half the fee to charity. They pitched me other ideas. Diamond-studded buttons for shoes if I'd walk behind a siren blaring car on 5th Avenue. Or stroll with a lion cub dressed in jersey on a diamond leash. They buried me in flowers. My room at the Savoy Plaza looked like either a honeymoon suite, or a funeral parlor. It was election season. Franklin D. Roosevelt had just been elected. Banks closed for 3 days. The country paused. An eerie calm before the storm. I longed to visit Hollywood. I had no real reason, only the desire. Scraping together a few dollars, I boarded an old-fashioned train, white linens, curtains, and courteous, ever-smiling attendants. One of my inventions had arrived before me, shoulder pads. Designed to emphasize a narrow waist. Manufacturers made fortunes. Joan Crawford loved them, molded her silhouette around them for years. Eventually, they became monstrous. Adrian used them with wild enthusiasm. He welcomed me warmly, even staged a fashion show with Hollywood stars in my honor. That day, I wore a black cape with exaggerated shoulders, trimmed in monkey fur, and left it in the coat room. Mid-show, a little starlet burst forth in what looked like my cape and chirped, "Isn't it divine? That darling boy is a genius." Another grand reception was planned. I was staying on the 27th floor of the Beverly Wilshire, about to mix the perfect martini for a friend, when the furniture slid across the floor. The building swayed like a palm tree in a storm. Neighboring houses almost sailed through our windows. An earthquake. I was mortified to admit, I panicked. We rushed down the stairs. By then, it was over. "Why does this hotel sway like that?" I gasped to the porter. "Madam," he replied proudly, "it's designed to sway." A young reporter from Hearst arrived for an interview. We climbed the stairs, elevators out, of course. As soon as she asked the first question, the world shook again. "Goodbye, goodbye," she shouted. "It's my first interview. I don't want it to be my last. That night, I listened to the radio. Many dead, countless homeless. And in the midst of tragedy, a mechanical voice offered solace. If the one you love is anxious, sleepless, buy her pills at your nearest drugstore. Commerce had returned. Death or no death, someone would profit. Back on the train, the carriage rocked like a ship at sea. I was traveling with an English friend, and during a layover in Chicago, we hailed the first taxi for a city tour. The driver, full of dignity, told us he once served as Al Capone's child's bodyguard, tasted the food, drove the school run. Just like a Roman emperor, I thought. Yes, ma'am, he said. This city's like no other. To your right, Lake Michigan, it looks like the sea. There's the McCormick Mansion, all gold taps. Not one stolen, yet. He sighed. That street, luxury today, almshouse tomorrow. Or prison, I've been in every one. That one on your right? Best in town, got cash? You'll eat better there than at the Ambassador Hotel. He pointed out the slums, called them the worst in the world, with pride. Even you Brits ain't got anything like it. And then, waving at a policeman, he shouted, see that? Every day, he gives me a ticket. And one flew right through our window. We arrived back at the station with a monstrous impression of Chicago. Wait, the driver called after my English friend, thrusting a flyer into his hands. Some light entertainment, for ladies, and for gentlemen. In Paris, one of Schiap's dearest friends was the charming Alfred Savoir, a playwright and a brilliant storyteller. Our temperaments aligned in some ways and diverged in others, especially when it came to amusements and affections. But we both shared a passion for chasing the most improbable experiences. One day, while strolling across Place de la Concorde, we suddenly decided to go to Spain. We hailed a taxi and told the driver, to Madrid. The driver, thrilled, begged us to let him put on a clean shirt. And off we went, escorted by the blaring sound of his horn. But something went wrong on that journey. Whether it was the punishing cobblestones or simply our mood clashing with the sternness of the Iberian spirit, the trip to Spain was not a success. I also happened to be in Rome on September 20th, during the first public appearance of the Black Shirts. I felt, profoundly, the ominous foreshadowing of the coming years of upheaval and error for Italy. From that point forward, Schiap considered herself definitively a citizen of France. It was this country that gave her the chance and the strength to become herself. If she had been a man, she would have said she had married France for love. But as a woman, all she could do was hope to be adopted. And even now, at times, she still feels like a stepchild, one watched over just a bit too closely.